Good afternoon and welcome to the Nonprofit and Government Career Forum, WFPG's annual career forum held in partnership with Women in International Security, George Washington University, New York University, University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Delaware. The program will begin with a Zoom panel discussion with international affairs professionals, followed by a handshake career fair where you will have the opportunity to virtually network with organizational representatives and learn about internships and full-time positions. My name is Shaz Akram, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Foreign Policy Group, a network of international affairs professionals dedicated to advancing women's leadership, amplifying their voices through substantive global issues like today's discussion, and preparing the next generation and mid-career professionals for leadership through year-round mentoring and professional development. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists today, Becca Balis, who is supporting social inclusion and sustainability at the World Bank, focusing on gender-based violence prevention across bank investments. Lauren Bedula, who is a managing director at Beacon Global Strategies, a strategic advisory firm specializing in international policy, defense, cyber, intelligence, and homeland security, and Coleman-Honn, who has worked as a Foreign Service officer since 2002 and currently serves as Deputy Director in the Office of Central European Affairs, and Saarnio, who is a career Foreign Service officer with more than 30 years of experience with foreign policy experiences in the U.S. State Department. Please use the Q&A tab to send in questions anytime during the discussion. We will start with Becca. Was your career trajectory linear? Can you speak about any transitions you've gone through and why and how you reinvented your career?
Sure, thank you so much for having me and welcome everyone. I think this is a great question to start out with because I think whenever you're on the other end of these things, it seems like everyone has a clear trajectory and everyone's path is the linear articulation of what needs to happen. But in reality, when you start to chat with 99% of anyone population, no one knows exactly where they're heading or going to end up. And so the short answer is no, of course, my career hasn't been linear, and I'm sure no one's has in reality. I think that in some points of my life, you feel like you have to articulate exactly where you want to end up. And I think that puts a lot of pressure actually and keeps you from being open to what might come your way and be of interest, even if it wasn't the thing you expected to enjoy doing. So to get, more specific, I thought that I wanted to end up in a certain area. I went to law school thinking I was going to do one aspect of policy work. Unexpected things happen in your personal life that makes things happen differently. Unexpected opportunities arise or fall through. And so it's all really about just kind of being honest with yourself. It can be really hard to kind of get off of the linear train and try something new. But I think the reality is that we make that into a bigger deal in our minds than actually what happens in practice when actually people are changing careers and changing positions regularly. I think what's challenging in particular in the public sector is that oftentimes our careers and our identities are wrapped up in sort of a topic or an issue area that we're committed to or that we think we want to work in and devote a certain part of our lives to. And it can be challenging to figure out how to craft your narrative to pull your identity away from sort of a topic or an issue area that you've been committed to and try something different. So I think the biggest skill in sort of transitioning or trying new things is to think about the actual skills that you're using. If you were in an advocacy role on a certain issue, there's no reason that you can't do sales or communications or something else in another role. Similarly, taking risks is okay. It's okay to turn things down when something doesn't feel right. It's okay to not do the thing that sort of seems like what everyone else in your career or your mentors are thinking you should do, or your peers are sort of doing as a routine thing. In law school, I didn't go to a law firm. I didn't do on-campus recruitment. I turned down more stable, grown-up jobs at certain points in my career in order to take consultancy positions that, fortunately I was financially able to do, but also that resonated more with what I was needing in my personal and professional life at that time. So I wanted to kind of start with that and hear from the other panelists as well, but we can certainly dig into any of those issues more throughout the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that feedback. My next question is for Lauren. How has your career and role transformed after transitioning to an online environment? What new skills do you believe are vital in this new era of work?
Thanks so much, Shaz. And thank you to the Women's Foreign Policy Group and all of the organizations who are hosting today's discussion. And frankly, I think the question is kind of reflective of how we're doing the format today and how we've all kind of adapted to new realities to still engage and have conversations. And so very excited to be here today. Let me start by saying, I know, Shaz, you mentioned my current role at Beacon Global Strategies, which is actually in the private sector, but I do have a background in nonprofit and am involved with several nonprofits, one being the Women's Foreign Policy Group. Another is a group called the Silicon Valley Defense Group, and another is called BENS, Business Executives for National Security, and then also in academia at the National Security Institute at George Mason University. And so I flag that because all of these different roles and hats require lots of engagement, in-person meetings, discussions, events like conferences. Prior to COVID, it was very rare that I'd be sitting at a computer all day, instead really out and about and engaging with people, traveling quite a bit. So when COVID first hit, it was really unclear how our business at Beacon Global Strategies or any of these organizations that rely so heavily on engagements and events for fundraising and the like, and relationships, how all of these organizations would be impacted. And I know, certainly at my business, we were quite nervous, jumped on the phone right away to think through how do we adapt to these new realities? How long will this last? We were kind of preparing to lose business because so much of what we do relies again on helping our clients engage and think through relationships and the like. But fast forward to today, we actually grew at a faster pace over the past 18 months than we had been the 6 years we were in business prior to that. So we learned a lot, I think, over that time. And really, again, I think the important lesson was to be prepared of challenges ahead and think through different scenarios, but be able to adapt, be flexible, be open, don't stress too much, kind of throw it in neutral and face challenges head on. I think we learned that communication is still so important, even if it's not in person. So keeping in touch with key colleagues and figuring out ways to have meetings that weren't so just dry and remote, but do things like virtual happy hours, which I know we've all gotten a little bit sick of, or find ways to do things outside or be creative about staying in touch. And then communicating, even if it's through emails and phone calls, but in a thoughtful way, I think is really important in a virtual environment. And then something else that we learned, which I think will stay with us, is it's not always necessary to travel somewhere for meetings or engagements. And we learned, certainly from a business perspective, we were able to accomplish a lot of the same goals remotely. And so I think we'll be, we'll have a different calculation going forward when we think through things like travel, whether it's the cost associated with it or the time spent, but still something we'll continue to do, I think, just approach differently. And then overall, too, I want to say for this group, and Becca, I know you hit on this quite a bit too, but I think it's so important to find things you're passionate about, and it makes it easier to be able to adapt in difficult environments like we saw with COVID and shifting to virtual and remote work. And then I also, I think goes hand in hand with passion is one of my first bosses gave me a book called Strengths Finder, which comes with the test, and maybe you all are familiar with it, but if not, it's by Tom Rath. And I highly recommend, as we're thinking through kind of career questions and goals, to think about taking this test in this book. And the message from my first boss really was focus on your strengths and be aware of your blind spots and weaknesses, but don't try to be good at everything. And I think, again, that helps you have passion and energy to go after things you really care about, so that it's easier to adapt, or Becca mentioned, take risks and things like that, because you can really keep your eyes on the prize and, again, leverage that interest and passion for something you care about while being nimble. So when challenges or unexpected things pop up, I think it's important to not panic and, still give it your all, and really know that things will work out no matter what. So thanks, Shaz. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Lauren. That was great. We now turn to Anne. Anne, how do you fight burnout and keep things in perspective? What keeps you going, and how do you balance your career with your friends, family, and other passions?
Thank you so much. And it is a pleasure to be here with all of you virtually today. My name is Anne Coleman-Honn, and I'm a Foreign Service Officer currently working as the Deputy Director for Central Europe at the State Department. I've been in the Foreign Service for 19 years and have worked in the Philippines and Canada and Panama, Sweden, most recently Moldova, and now back in Washington. And I would answer your question by echoing something and maybe amplifying that Lauren said, which is talking about finding your passion and what energizes you. And I think that in any job, there are going to be parts of our work that we do, and they're important. We do our best at them, but they don't necessarily energize us. But then there are also the parts of what we do and what does become our career, our job, that make us feel more alive and make us feel like we are living our purpose in some way, or doing something that really brings us passion. Accomplishment, yes, but also something that fits our skill set and that we see that we're adding value to what we're doing. And I think a key in avoiding burnout is being able to balance between the parts of our jobs that are necessary and important, but draining, and the parts of our jobs that are energizing. And there's been a lot of interesting work done about how when people can kind of customize their work to the point that they get done what needs to get done, but that is draining, but can incorporate more of the energizing side of work into their work lives, both they become more productive, but the teams that they're on become even more productive. I'm also very passionate about finding balance in work and life outside of work. The leaders that I most enjoy working for and have learned the most from are also those who, in addition to being passionate about and excellent at their job, also have and nurture and pay attention to interests outside of work in their community, with their family, with their friends, because those are also the parts of life that energize and inspire us. And so I co-founded an organization at the State Department called Balancing Act that looks at the ways that people integrate their responsibilities outside of work with their work lives. I am hopeful on this subject because I see that the generations of people who are entering the workforce now are prioritizing these issues and asking about them. And I think it's just going to make our work cultures better because it allows us to strive to have that balance while doing excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very detailed answer, which is exactly what I think our audience is looking for. I now turn to Sue with a question. With your impressive background and career, how you've been able to adapt to working in an international field virtually. What benefits and challenges have you faced in your respective career when working with people from around the world without having in-person interactions? I guess Anne might also have some feedback later on this question, but Maybe you could elaborate on this.
Thank you. And thanks to the Women's Foreign Policy Group, a great group. And I love the fact that we're interacting with students and people who are approaching the job force. And I hope a lot of them are considering careers in the Foreign Service. I am finishing up next week after 36 years at the State Department. I'll be retiring next week. But my last assignment was as Consul General at our consulate in Tijuana, in Mexico. And I think that your question is very well suited. If you had asked me 3 years ago, could we operate virtually in a global pandemic, and how would you supervise and run a consulate of 300 people? I would have said, that's crazy. You can't do that. And in fact, we did, and we had to, and we did, and we adapted. And I think it was, we were all crazy busy before COVID. And then we became crazy busy on Zoom and Teams and WebEx and, everything, a meeting scheduled every hour. And I think in some ways we were more productive because we weren't traveling to meetings and going through traffic and commuting to the office. And we were able to maintain some of the discussions. And I think Lauren was right. I think, some efforts we were able to maintain that contact. But on the other hand, there were things that you miss with the virtual connections. And I always said, whenever I went to go to a meeting or a conference or a panel discussion, I always had in my mind 3 or 4 people that I wanted to see on the sidelines. I have these questions for these people, and they weren't questions you could ask in a big group on a Zoom call, but you wanted to have a quiet conversation over the lunch and over coffee or something. And that's what we've missed. We've missed that personal interaction. And I've always been a firm believer in the Foreign Service and the idea that we need a trained cadre of people who can operate in foreign cultures and foreign languages. And that's why we need the State Department, and that's why we need a Foreign Service. And I don't think we can continue to operate, virtually. Do we eliminate all our embassies and consulates and just replace them with Zoom calls? No, we can't do that. We have to have people on the ground. There are just things that you have to do in person. We, even during COVID and even during the pandemic, our consulate was responsible for issuing the agricultural worker visas. They were deemed essential to the food supply chain to get the Mexican workers up to the United States. But that meant we had to have people in the office. But we had very strict controls from Washington, very strict parameters that we were operating under, given the rates of COVID in our area. And how many people we could have in the office. At one point, I think we were limited to about 18% of our staff could be in the office at any given time. And then we gradually moved up to 40%, but we still had to issue, hundreds of visas every week. So it was a challenge, and we had to do that in person. So can the virtual world replace everything? No, we need to have people who can be in touch and talk face to face with people. For many things, many of the roles we do overseas. But I think it can help bridge gaps. And I think one thing that people I talked to before I left Mexico said, nobody's ever traveling again to a conference to give a 20-minute presentation and turning around, getting on the plane the same day and going back. That's just not going to be happening. So I think we're going to have to adapt our operating, but at the expense of losing some of those face-to-face conversations on the margins. And I hope we can get a balance there and not lose that completely in the post-COVID world.
I'd love to jump in and pile on because Sue, I think you're exactly right. And one thing neither of us really dug into, but I think really happened over the past 18 months is just like the digital transformation that took place was pretty astonishing. I think, many of us needed that kick in the butt to be able to jump on a Zoom call or, figure out how to do this and download apps, et cetera. And so even when you look across, I think the US government too, how we were able to figure out and like even national security communities, how the DoD transitioned to telework, just even from a technical perspective, which I think, is pretty astonishing. And then Sue made a great point about conferences where, some of the speakers won't fly in. I just went to one of my first conferences a few weeks back and we had several present virtually. But I will say, to Sue's point, the folks who are there were much more engaging. They stayed after. You could really get to know them. You know, we'll never be able to do that virtually. And so I think kind of this hybrid model is going to be really, really important, but definitely agree with Sue's perspective there.
So, but thank you both for that perspective. I sort of want to open this to the panel. When working on high stress issues or in a high stress environment, how do you keep yourself from getting overwhelmed by the situations you're working on or in? And a second part of that question is, I want you also to give me an example of a risk or gamble you took in your career and how it paid off. So 2 parts to, if each one of you could sort of comment on that.
I can start. As I had sort of started to mention the latter half of your question before. In terms of, I guess these questions I can answer together in another way from what I said previously. So I think oftentimes, first of all, what feels like a risk in the moment, you know, in hindsight, when you talk to people about their trajectories, they don't frame it that way because, as I think Lauren said, things will work out. You can trust that even if you don't know where your path is going, if you do the next thing that feels right or resonates with all the aspects of your life in one moment, it will lead to the next thing. You don't have to know sort of necessarily what the end goal is, and that will allow you to explore and allow yourself to grow and change, which I think is something that when I was graduating from undergrad, didn't quite realize how much my own interests were going to change and my own passions were going to evolve, not only in the issues that we work on, but also in terms of, you know, am I better at management? Am I better at research? Am I better? I mean, there's different things you learn about yourself from your first job and then continue to learn for the rest of your career. To answer specifically in terms of how to deal with stress, I mean, I think the first, and this also, I think, responds to a question in the Q&A, my first job that I got, it was always kind of recommended to me to get as much experience overseas and in different contexts as you can. That is really hard right now, although hopefully will be becoming easier again once travel becomes a little bit less fraught. But I think as Sue and Lauren pointed out, there are experiences working with people in other contexts that you can't replicate through a Zoom conversation. So my first role was a risk. It was a fellowship to go work in Liberia with a big international NGO. Fellowships are often a great way to take, you know, a short-term position. It can feel a little risky when other people are going into very stable career paths and you don't know where you're going to end up 6 months later. But to me, that was something that really paid off for 2 main reasons. One, because that fellowship turned into a full-time job, which of course I didn't know at the time that was going to happen, but fortunately it did. A lot of times if you're in the right place at the right time, that's kind of just what pans out. Secondly, you take those opportunities when you can. I mean, hopefully, like I said, these types of fellowships and going and learning in new contexts will become more available again. But it gets harder not only because of global health risks and pandemics, but as I said before, life throws a lot of things at you that you can't predict. When you're younger and have flexibility is really the time to take those kinds of risks, to take those opportunities, to try a new context that you never envisioned yourself working in, and see what happens. It gets a lot harder to take those kinds of risks and do those kinds of things. I'll stop there, but we can chat more about dealing with stress and burnout and what to do in high stress environments after we hear from other panelists on that, maybe. Thanks, Shaz.
Anne, and then Sue, and then Lauren, if each one of you could,
Sure.
that'd be great.
So the first thing I would say here is take solace in the people that you're working with. While certainly working in high stress environments is challenging, I think there's something also exhilarating about dealing with tough situations or a difficult problem with smart people that are sharing the same goal. So that's one thing. The second is to keep a sense of humor, even when things are getting stressful and the pace is quick. I think it's helpful to be able to take a moment and to have a sense of humor and to enjoy the people that you are dealing with the situation with also. The third is to take opportunities to learn from what is going on and to learn from the people that you are working with and for. One of the friends that I have in the State Department who I was working with said that they had the motto, let's make better mistakes tomorrow. Like there will be always mistakes we make when things are moving quickly and we're doing our best. But if we learn from the mistakes we make in a high stress environment, then we will be continually improving and being better able to deal with the next thing that comes along. And the last sounds incredibly maybe simple, but it is valuable, which is to sleep enough. Like sleep is something, the first thing that we let go when things become very stressful. But the more we know from the research, the more critical it is to keep our brains sharp through sleeping enough, even when the stress is high. And I'm sure that Sue Saarnio and other Foreign Service legends here will have other commentary on this that I will learn from.
Well, I'll jump in and thank you, legend. I don't know, but it's sure great to see you on here. So I would say, and I think one thing that Lauren talked about that I think is really important is that we have to recognize that you have to take your career, it can't be linear because your life isn't linear. You have to take your career as your life goes. So when you have kids and you have family medical emergencies and you have a reason to step back from work, you have to do that sometimes in a career. And don't take the highest flying job when your kids are infants, for example, or if you're going to do that, make sure you have an army of childcare providers at home backing you up. There are the things that you have to measure against what stage you are in your life, and I have to say that goes along with the question about taking risks. About 22 years ago. I decided to take leave without pay because my kids were little and I had a mother who was battling cancer. So I took leave without pay for 2 years, kind of thinking, well, maybe I'll go back to the State Department. Maybe I'll do something else. And in the middle of that, one of my best friends in the Foreign Service, still one of my best friends today, called me up and said, I have an idea. Let's job share. And I'm like, what is it? Can we do that? And that was 4 years of job sharing. I job shared with 2 different partners, and we have a small core of people in the State Department who have done that over the years. I'm very proud, as I'm sort of ending my career. That's one of the things that I'm most proud to have done, because I think it is something that, and when I went into it, I kind of thought, well, this is going to be the end of my career. I'll just kind of, head out. And then I came to realize over time, I had some very wise female mentors, and make sure you have those in your career, because one of them told me, what do you mean you're going to leave? You're not going to leave. You're going to get promoted. You're going to stay in. And it turned out she was right. So I think, you have to pace your career to your life and make sure that your life is dictating things, not your career.
Thanks, Sue. I'm over here taking notes because I just think that's such great advice. And I don't think we talk about it as often as we should or hear about it from mentors. And to that point on mentors, I just think it's so important. I mentioned my first boss who gave me that book, Strengths Finder. We get dinner monthly. She lives nearby and is like family to me. She was one of the first captains in the Navy as a female, and someone I very much look up to. And I think, the reason we're all on here too is because we want to pay that forward and help others. And I think, for women, that's so important, because I don't know if, I know there are certainly societal pressures, but I think a lot of us have the nature to put pressures on ourselves as well and be good at everything or do everything or excel. And there are debates around whether you can or can't do it all. And I think Sue makes a great point where it's kind of like weave in and out, figure out what your priorities are and how they evolve. And really focus on that and go easy on yourself. I think for the question about stress, I love this saying, and I think about it all the time, but it's like when you step back and you look at everything you have to do, it's very overwhelming. But the saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Just start chipping away and be realistic about what you can accomplish. And I think, Anne, you said it about sleep and how important it is to kind of invest in yourself and your own energy, realize your limitations, so that you can take risks. And I think kind of some of those mental health aspects of stress and dealing with stress. I actually, in college, I've realized from an experience, I got shingles, and it turned out to be from stress. And they thought maybe I had an immune deficiency because I was so young, but it really was stress. So if you're not treating it properly, it'll have implications beyond just, how you feel that day. It's, your health can really be impacted by it. So please do pay attention to that. On the risk question, I think an example of when I took a risk was really, I think, or several examples of taking risk are really around feeling uncomfortable and doing things, even if you're not technically qualified for a job, apply to it or give that person a call and see if they're up for a conversation with you, so you can even learn from that conversation. Or don't be afraid of feeling uncomfortable when it comes to taking risks, because you always land on your feet. And I can't remember who said it, but something else. I like to take risks with home improvements. I just put in a Nest thermostat in my home and didn't know what I was doing and blew my transformer. And so that ended up costing me more than it would to have hired an electrician in the first place to do it. But I said to myself, well, I learned so much through this process to cut the power before taking my thermostat off the wall, things like that. So if you remind yourself, even if by taking risk, it doesn't work out as it should, college and university is expensive. So are lessons like that sometimes, or setbacks as well. So always see them as learning opportunities.
Thank you so much. That was a real good analysis of what, our young professionals need to be looking at, taking care of their health as well as looking at opportunities and taking risks. I have one question for Anne and Sue. How did your education influence your decision to go into public service? Did studying internationally affect your perspective on the issues you face in your career today? So either one of you could jump in and
Sue, do you want to take this first?
Yeah, I'll just say, of course, and I hope everybody is using the excuse to go overseas and study abroad. I realize COVID's put a kind of a crimp in that, but my daughter, who's in grad school doing international development, is in Switzerland this semester. So once she got her QR code from the Swiss government, she was okay, but it was complicated at first, but she's managed to do it. So I would encourage everybody to do it. I was an exchange student in high school, opened my eyes to the broader world. I also studied abroad at the American University in Cairo when I was in college. And I think, I've always was aware that we had diplomats, but I really didn't understand the process, that there was an exam that you had to take, and then you had to get into the State Department. And so I think people are a lot wiser nowadays. I would certainly hope that people who are grad students and undergrads who are getting out of school, they should be looking at government careers in the civil service or the foreign service. And I hope you would. And we definitely have, people who can talk to you about that. There are the State Department, I think it's state.gov/jobs or something like that. They have a very active recruiting page, and we're certainly trying to ramp up. Now, we've had a few tough years, admittedly, but we are ramping back up, and we are looking for the best and the brightest, and we're looking for diverse candidates for sure. So please, 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 if you are at all interested in getting into the government and working abroad, look at the Foreign Service as an opportunity, or as a something to consider.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue, and fully agree on the encouragement to consider a career in the Foreign Service. I will add, when I was in undergrad, I studied abroad in France and in Spain, and then I did a graduate program on a Fulbright scholarship in Belgium. I also highly recommend applying for any Fulbright program. It's a great way to study and do research overseas, but I would say my international experiences cemented the idea in my head that I wanted to at least try to enter the Foreign Service. And I took the Foreign Service exam in college. A lot of people enter the Foreign Service older. Entering straight out of undergrad or grad school is not the only path into the Foreign Service. But for those who are interested in it, consider just taking the Foreign Service exam as another experience and to give yourself another potential career option.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions that are coming in now, so I ask the audience to keep typing. I'm going to start posing some of those questions. One is from Uguchi Obidignu. Thank you so much to the Foreign Policy Group for this opportunity. I'm curious to know how each of the panelists have gotten their first international affairs job. As an international student, I hear people say a lot around here that you only get jobs through networking. I think networking is great, but I'd like to know if this is how our panelists got their jobs. Anyone, any of our panelists can jump in and answer that question.
I'm happy to start. And I had sort of seen this question before and talked about getting a fellowship through Princeton, and I wanted to also jump into Sue and Anne's comments about studying abroad, because I'd also mentioned studying abroad isn't the only opportunity for getting experience overseas, of course. Also, as I mentioned, do it when you can. If you get a short-term role that is overseas, that is great. And don't worry if you don't know exactly where it's going to lead. It often will lead somewhere. I think that networking is a scary word for me, at least. But actually, I think just think of it as conversations with interesting people. And if you reframe it that way, at least again, for me, it's enjoyable, and it should be, because you should be genuinely interested and have questions and be open to learning, and also be open to offering your own perspectives. We're all looking for other perspectives and ideas when we have these conversations, regardless of how far along you are, I think, in your career. So I think the question is sort of, there's two ways to answer. Yes, you can certainly get positions through networking, but I think the real benefit of networking or having interesting conversations is that you might learn about things you don't even know exist. You might learn about an organization that you don't know exists, or a job that you never had even heard about. And certainly there's jobs that exist now that did not exist 10 years ago when I was finishing school. So I think it's really just more about learning what's out there. One of my friends was interested in a career change and started networking in a way that wasn't targeting any one field, but she wanted to only talk to people that were really happy in their current organizations, and just learn what organizations were treating their employees well, where people had opportunities for growth and were happy. And I think that was such a cool idea, to not silo yourself into one area, but really learn about what's out there and how your skills might contribute somewhere else in a way that you don't even know about. And then just also to tag on, because there was a question in the chat about spending a lot of time overseas, which I did with NGOs as opposed to government, so a little bit different maybe, and also speaks to the question about stress a little bit, I think. Certainly was invaluable. I was so fortunate to work with colleagues from all over the world. And as I mentioned, I started my career in Liberia, and then was able to leverage language skills in French to go to other parts of West Africa, as well as to Southeast Asia. For a period of time in the Middle East. And those experiences were wonderful for that phase of my life. And I say that to just speak really candidly and honestly that there is an element of stress being far from other people. I have a great network of friends. I just went to somebody's birthday party last night who I met in Liberia years and years and years ago, and we've stayed in friends and now live in the same neighborhood in New York because the world is small. So it's not really that you're giving up a social life, but it does mean that you might be giving up on certain comforts or certain people in your life, being far from family, being far from other support systems. And I certainly reached a point where there was, I think, a little too much stress, and that was no longer really working for that phase of my life. And so, I made the decision to be finished with that aspect, at least for the moment, of my career, and come back and try something different. And so I think, also to say, if some place is too stressful, if you're not able to find solace or get accommodations like Sue and Anne mentioned, and you're in a foreign environment that's not, that you don't have that kind of support, it's okay to admit to yourself that that's not the right place for you right now. It's not worth martyring yourself to do the thing that you think you have to do to check the box. So I would just encourage everyone to be mindful about that also.
So we've got a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to bunch some of them together. There's two questions, which again, it's about being out of school graduated from like 4 years out, struggling with getting an application noticed, finding a job, being hired with more experience, and then also someone being 3 years out of grad school can speak a couple of languages, 3 to 4 languages, but wanted to find some way to incorporate that into her career by possibly working overseas. So I guess I'm bunching these two, that 4 years out of college and then other skills to incorporate into job search. I don't know who wants to take this question, but maybe Lauren, you could jump in and speak on being noticed in the US in a job search.
I love that question. And I kind of, right out of school, wanted to go work for the intelligence community, and was submitting resumes into what felt like a black hole. And as Becca says, I hope some of that has evolved in the past 10 years, but maybe not. And Sue, I see, provided the link she mentioned in the chat here, because I saw that was a question too. But to get noticed, I always felt it was the case to write, or at least when I'm reviewing resumes, a thoughtful cover letter. And I think kind of packages that we're submitting are also evolving. Like maybe it's not a standard cover letter, resume, and the like anymore. But instead of applying to 100 jobs and just submitting the same thing, if you have the time to be thoughtful about those that you were really interested in and really care about, I think it makes a huge difference to put in that time. I can't tell you how many times I've read cover letters that had different organizations than the company I'm at, just copied and pasted in because they they forgot to replace the company name or things like that. So be thoughtful is my first point. But after that experience, I was like, boy, I'd love to go the rest of my career without submitting to a job application on paper. Like I'd really rather just wow people, get recruited for things. And I think by giving it your all, and this is once you're already in the field, so it's kind of a not a good way to answer it, but to the internship question, I started out at Ben's, Business Executives for National Security, a nonprofit, as an intern, and they told me there is no way to become full-time here. So we encourage you to apply for other jobs. And I still gave it my all, and they hired me full-time for that. So I think, politely don't take no for an answer, still give everything your all. If you have time to volunteer for things, it makes me think of that networking question where that feels so forced and sounds so forced. Don't show up at, events where you're having forced conversations, but instead be thoughtful about, understanding topics you care about. Find think tanks who are doing events on them. If you're really curious about something, then as Becca said, you're having these great conversations with people. If you can start writing and whether it's like a blog post or publishing. I think it's a great way to get noticed. You could post things through blogs on LinkedIn, for example, but really be creative because it's difficult to stand out on paper. And so if you can, once you submit something, bump into someone who's speaking on a panel at a think tank event, or give them a call. The Navy captain I mentioned, who's a great mentor of mine, did not pick up my resume when I applied for the internship at Ben's, but I called over there to make sure she got it. And she decided that because I put in the initiative that they'd interview me. So always go that extra step, especially if it's that, top of your list as far as a job. And then get involved with organizations. I know I've mentioned think tank events, but if you're able to apply for fellowships or really put in the work to publish something, it's a good way to get noticed rather than forcing a conversation. And then on the networking piece too, I always say to folks, it's great to reach out for coffees, but be really thoughtful about the other person's time too. They're probably pretty busy, so come with questions or make sure it's kind of a productive use of time. Don't put it on them. There are other ways to keep in touch with folks instead of having, coffee every month. You can send them an article and say, hey, this made me think of you. Hope all is well. Stuff like that. Be creative and thoughtful, and I think it'll help you stand out to get jobs and get noticed.
So we're having, thanks Lauren for that. We're having a lot of questions about foreign service, getting in, and Sue, I see you're answering some of those questions live, which is great. Some questions are coming in about NGOs, how to start a career for an international student in an NGO or a nonprofit in the US. So Becca, would you like to answer that question or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to shed a little bit more light. So I had mentioned fellowships as one way. Obviously, that would be once you're graduating and working full time. Certainly, interning is a great foot in the door, of course, everywhere. I know that unfortunately, a lot of nonprofit internships are still unpaid. So I think that's something that everyone's trying to work on so that we can get more diverse candidates that have perspectives from all over. But definitely, I think also I didn't realize when I was applying to things, if you volunteer somewhere like 2 days a week, it doesn't necessarily have to be, a full-time 6-month internship or something. Just getting to know people just a few days a week can be great, or volunteering for a specific project or event or that kind of thing can be a great way to do that. It's hard to speak, of course, specifically, but back to also what Lauren was saying, cover letters and resumes, I think, are no longer supposed to just be like your one copy that you send around. I totally agree with that. Tailor it. And as I said in my first answer, you got to understand what the language is that different organizations are using. Terminology that you would put in a cover letter for one place might really sort of irk someone in another place, or figuring out how to kind of market yourself and cut out the things that are extraneous in your resume and keep the things that do make it seem like we all have this linear trajectory that makes total sense. Of course, that's not going to be the case if you include everything. So it was I had the advice that you should sort of have a copy of a resume with like everything, a few pages long thrown in, and then cut the things that are relevant to each position as you apply. I think I get caught in the trap sometimes still of just like sending stuff out and hoping, you kind of feel like you're productive in applying to things when you do that. But the reality is that it does, I think, get put into the black hole a little bit. So if you've met someone at the organization in person, or if you've volunteered in the past and can just shoot them an email and say, hey, saw this position, I just applied. I think that's also the aspect of networking. They're not necessarily going to be able to get you the job, but they might be able to flag your resume to get looked at because they know that you're genuinely interested and you don't have to have some expertise or background. Nobody expects that. But they know that you're excited and will work hard and are committed. And I think, at least for me, that's enough for me to at least have somebody interview. If I have that, that ability to give someone at least that opportunity.
Thank you for that answer. I'm bunching a bunch of questions together, and this is for Sue and Ann. A lot of participants are asking about, making it through careers with Department of State, government positions. Can someone ask, can they start an international career right out of grad school, undergraduate program? And how you can get noticed for a job in State Department. So I bunched up about 3 questions together, and maybe Sue and Ann, you could take those questions.
Yeah, I think that my first answer would have, of course, been, right out of undergrad, go for the Peace Corps, but they're on pause right now. They're taking a hiatus, I think, while they're waiting out the results of what's happening with COVID around the world. But think about it, look at Peace Corps, because I do think that's a great intro into how government works. I do think nowadays it is hard. You need to do something that gets you the experience, that gets you the foot in the door. But I do think it's a good idea before grad school, even to take some time and work internationally if you can. There's a lot of websites out there about the nonprofit world. I know there's a lot of work right now, opportunities working with refugees, refugee resettlement. A lot of that is stateside, but there's some great groups out there like the Lutheran Social Services. I was living near San Diego, Jewish Family Services out there, highest. Those groups are doing a lot of work that is essentially international work, but it's working domestically. But they're doing, getting your feet wet with those groups and getting experience in human rights issues, asylum issues. That's not going to go away. That's a field that's going to grow, I'm sure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. It is hard to get paying jobs if you're not you don't have work status, but I think you can get internships. And I think, some organizations, if you get your foot in the door, they might be willing to petition for you to, come work for them and get you a visa. But it is harder out of graduate school. Admittedly, you're facing an uphill battle, but there's some great websites out there that have opportunities in the nonprofit world as well as the government opportunities. Everybody knows about usajobs.gov, right? That's the other website for civil service. I put the Foreign Service site up there, but I think those are the ways you break in, and you never know. Also, the fellowships, the presidential management fellowships for grad students. I think there's some other Pickering and Rangel fellows for diversity candidates. Those are always really great opportunities to get your foot in the door in government. So look around and pursue them all.
I fully agree that pursuing all the opportunities and any opportunity to have kind of an international element to what you're doing is a positive thing. There are lots of different kind of critical needs scholarship opportunities as well. So just keep an open mind and apply for as much as you can. I passed the Foreign Service exam in undergrad, but that's not the typical path. Most people have had some work experience, some more international experience before they join the Foreign Service.
Shaz, you're on mute.
Sorry, I have one last question, and then I'm going to do the lightning round. This is an important question, I think, for our panelists. I've had a lot of serious health issues in my time in university as I've applied for internships. This has negatively impacted my ability to obtain a job or internship. In terms of experience, how should I go about approaching this with job applications? Lauren, maybe you could take a stab at this.
My quick reaction is there's still time, and hopefully your situation has improved, or I'd try to not dwell on the past too much. So if you didn't have time to get internships during, certain periods of time in the past, there's still time. I think someone brought up volunteering, or if your health allows you to do things like start writing and publishing, that's a good way to maybe not have the time commitment, but still get your name out there and find ways to get recognized. And then, some of the things we talked about where it's, finding your passions and goals, and then understanding different organizations that do the work that you're looking into, and see if you can show up at things like that, ask questions, not necessarily have those forced conversations, but instead fit into that community. And then a good way to find those types of organizations, I've mentioned Ben several times, Business Executives for National Security. And when I was a senior in college, I literally Googled business and national security because those are the two things I was interested in and passionate about. So then I was like, Ben's perfect, and worked there for 4 years. So do some research, find things, that stand out and excite you, and you can show up, but there's still time. Don't stress. It's not like you missed the boat on things. So I'm sure you'll find good opportunities.
And maybe, Sue, from the perspective of State Department, because they have all these, special considerations for applicants, maybe you could say something in terms of applying for a foreign service position or a job at State Department.
Yeah, I'm pretty far away from it, having come into the State Department 36 years ago. But what I can say is I know that there's a very organized network in social media, people who coordinate, cooperate on comparing their experiences, both through the written exam and the oral exam process. You're not alone out there like we were when we took it, and there is a book on the foreign, you can practice just like for the SATs and the GREs, you can take practice tests for the written exam. And there's a network of people out there you'll find in social media, people who are looking at government opportunities. And I think they share a lot of information back and forth, and I think you'll find them to be a really helpful network. There's no secrets out there anymore in this world. Social media and the internet have made that very clear, that there's, people who will share the questions they were asked in the interviews, and they will share their experiences, what they did to prepare. I always say that if you're a well-read person who's had a good undergraduate and graduate career, you should be able to qualify for the State Department, obviously, and had a good undergraduate experience at William and Mary if she was able to qualify getting in from that. But there's no lack of sharing information out there. You're in a big pool of people who will help you out, and I think that's great. And I think it's important to find someone who's done it. And I will put this offer out there. If somebody wants to contact me through the Foreign Policy Group, I'll put my personal email in. There's a large pool of new officers in my consulate back in Tijuana that I could put people in touch with. So I'll put my personal Gmail in there, and I'm happy to do some networking and connecting people if now that I'm retired, I have time to do that.
Thank you, Sue. One final round. I will ask each one of you to give a piece of final advice that you'd like to share and leave us with. And if you could also put in a little piece of advice on salary negotiation with your final line. I guess I can start with Becca.
Sure, yeah, thank you. I think my general piece of advice is that everything doesn't have to be strategic. There's no one path, there's no one trajectory that's surefire. Things will change. So don't stress about if you feel like you've missed the opportunity. One of my greatest favorite quotes is that if you miss the bus, there's going to be another one coming in a few more minutes. So it's going to work out. In terms of salary negotiations, such an important topic that I wish everyone would discuss more in this industry. I think the first thing I would say that I have learned is once you're offered something, it's okay to ask for something more if it will help you to do it. I never heard of a situation where someone's had an offer rescinded because after they were offered something, they asked for an accommodation. So that's the first thing. But at that same time, all nonprofit jobs have a budget line and there's only so much that they can do. I think something that I wish I had known earlier was that even if they can't increase your salary, they might be able to give you some other kind of benefit that actually can end up being more useful as you get older and have other needs. So I think learn what's even possible in the organization, talk to people at that level at different organizations. And if it's not going to work for you in that moment in time, that's also okay. You can do what's going to actually be realistic for you in the immediate, and know that these careers will be there. There will be other opportunities. I think that's most I can say in a short amount of time.
Laura?
Just quickly on the salary piece, and maybe this is kind of overall advice, but I've found whenever having negotiations or discussions about my future or role at organizations, I always frame it as far as benefits to the organization rather than centered around myself. I think if you kind of have an entitled tone to what you're doing, it's not received as well. So if you focus on the value you've added to the organization, and where you think the organization can grow and how you can support that or meet those goals, I think it is often received well. I've had kind of 5 different roles at my current firm and 4 at the nonprofit before that. So I've had many of those conversations and always really focus on the organization or business rather than just myself, and then slot it in there.
Final advice? Any other advice, Lauren? I guess that was salary negotiation and
yeah, I think overall it's helpful. You know, I'm a millennial, we get labeled different things with generation, and so really want to foot stomp that point where it's like, don't fall into those buckets of being, you know, you're lucky to have me, but instead sound why you're excited about what you're doing, but really about, you know, focusing on the organization, the mission, and don't sound self-centered in those kind of conversations, dialogue, or I think is received well that way.
Thank you. Anne?
Yes, so I would say salary negotiation, do it. Just lay it out there. You don't lose anything by trying, and you lose a lot by not trying. And then final words of advice, don't be afraid to think about what you want and know what you want and pursue it, because most people have not clearly thought out what it is exactly that they want. So if you have that clearly in your mind, that will give you an advantage. And then the last piece I would say is just echoing all of the great comments earlier on mentorship, the importance of mentorship. But remember, mentoring and the benefits from it is a two-way street. Your mentor may learn from you too. And I will tell you that I have learned many, many things from the younger people that I am theoretically the mentor for. They have taught me things about technology, new platforms, how to be savvy in 2021. And especially in this COVID era, I would say even people in the mid-career field that I am can benefit a lot from having people who are earlier in their career help us learn about different things. So mentoring can go both ways.
Sue?
Yeah, I was in the government. I never had a chance to negotiate my salary, so I'm not going to be able to offer much advice there. If you join the government, it's transparent. The pay scales are out there, and you get what you get when you move up. But as far as life advice, I guess the thing that I've learned is the conventional wisdom. You know, take the job that's got the most money, the most power, the most whatever. No, I would say as you move up your career, don't take a job just because you're flattered that they asked you. Make sure it's a job that fits where you are in your life and in your world. If you have aging parents and someone offers you a job on the other side of the world, that might not be the time to take it. But if you've been offered that job, there'll be another one out there. But you might need to think about taking care of, you know, what happens and what's important to you in life too. So as a closing thought, don't just jump on the first plane. Be thoughtful about what job you take.
Thank you, Sue. And this has been a delight talking with our amazing panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today. One advice to the audience I will share is don't be afraid to apply for the Fulbright program. It's not as daunting as you think it is. If you get rejected, apply again. Learn a foreign language. It is always helpful with finding a new job. Being multilingual is a big asset. And just travel wherever you can go. Be safe and travel. And thank you all for joining us, for the students with your excellent questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all, but we tried to answer as many as we could. A recording of this session will be available to all attendees and will also be uploaded to WFPG's YouTube channel. We hope you'll stay connected with us, join us as a member if you aren't already, and consider signing up to be a virtual mentor to help support us in our mission to prepare the next generation of women and mid-career professionals for leadership. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you for joining us again and have a good day. Bye now.